In the second part of our series, following up on Ron's thoughts to do with contemplative theology, I want to look at the organ and posture of contemplation. We have a very important Greek word, nous. In English, we transliterate that to N-O-U-S, nous. And it's been a Greek word that's been horribly translated at times into English by words like mind or reason or intellect. But this gives the impression that the nous is simply rationality or head knowledge. The mind as opposed to the heart, the reasoning mind that thinks through things logically. And this certainly is not what the nous meant in the ancient world, neither for the Greeks nor for the Christians. The problem with that kind of interpretation or translation of the word is that we then also speak of metanoia or repentance as a change of mind. And I think in some ways this is a reaction to a type of repentance that is very moralistic or self-loathing. And so for the folks who recognize that as a problem, they swing on the pendulum to this other side and reduce nous or metanoia, this repentance, to simply a change of mind or a new direction of thought, when in fact metanoia or repentance is a change of one's entire being at the deepest level. It's not merely an intellectual shift from one belief system to another. Certainly it would impact us at the heart level. And so in the New Testament we find that the nous can be associated with the mind or the heart, or even in the spirit. And in French, sometimes nous is translated esprit. It's French for spirit. And another way we might define the nous is the eyes of the heart. Paul says, open the eyes of my heart that we might see. And so in hesychastic prayer, a form of Eastern contemplative Christian prayer, we hear the fathers speaking about taking the mind or the nous down into the heart, a sort of ultimate centeredness, if you will, where we learn to pray the Jesus prayer from deep within the soul. In a big collection of Eastern books called the Philokalia, we have a glossary at the back that defines nous in this way. The author writes, the nous is the highest faculty in man, through which, provided that it's purified, he knows God, or the essence of created things, by direct apprehension or spiritual perception. And this is what Ron meant by existential knowing, actually participating in the thing that we're knowing. That can be God, or it can be the life in this world, but we're seeing beyond the surface level or indirect knowledge to a real primary knowledge, the thing as it is, or in the case of God, perceiving God directly rather than through mediated ways. The glossary in the Philokalia goes on to say this: unlike the diania or reason, the nous does not function by formulating abstract concepts or arguing through deductive reasoning. That's really the heart of modernity. And those who believe the ancients thought of nous in that way are really reading the nous through the lens of René Descartes and modernity. No, the nous is not about abstraction. It's not about concepts. It's not about simple deduction. Rather, the nous understands divine truth by means of immediate experience, intuition, or what St. Isaac the Syrian called simple cognition, that is, knowing directly. They continue, the nous dwells in the depths of the soul. It constitutes the innermost aspect of the heart. The nous is the organ of contemplation, the eye of the heart. And so you can really get this idea that the nous is not something that happens up here with head knowledge or analysis or deduction, but rather it's when the mind lives from the heart and when it knows that which only the eyes of the heart can see. And so if that's the nous, then the activity of the nous we call noesis, or noetic knowing. And again, this isn't about thinking through abstract concepts or merely holding visual images in our mind or imagination, but rather the function of the nous is that noetic knowing apprehends spiritual realities in a direct way. Now this goes all the way back into the writings of Plato, and sometimes the translations of Plato are horrendous in this way, that those who've translated it through the lens of Descartes then see Nous in Plato's writings and translate it intellect or reason, when in fact that's exactly what Plato is resisting. He gives us in the Republic 3 analogies. All of these are about saying that there's a higher way of knowing through the use of the Nous than simple reason. We have the cave analogy, the sun analogy, and the divided line analogy. And I'll just lay out each of these very briefly because they do form a foundation for some of Christian thought in the early church. The idea of the cave is that we have someone who's chained up by their delusions in the depths of a cave, and all they can see are these shadows on the cave wall, and yet they believe that's reality. Well, somehow by grace, the chains that hold them there are broken, and someone, perhaps a mentor, drags them to the mouth of the cave. What Plato describes at that level, the movement from the chains to the mouth of the cave, you can see it through the mentoring process, Socratic learning, a kind of reasoning that gets us to the mouth of the cave. But that's the limits of reason. At the mouth of the cave, one must wait for the light of the sun to help reach to our eyes and enlighten and form our seeing so that we can respond. And this is really a matter of contemplative knowing, that which is received, that which is seen with the eyes of the heart. This also is the essence of the analogy of the sun, where the sun first of all creates the eyes and then sheds light into the eyes in a way, again, that we receive, and that we must wait on this kind of knowledge. And then finally, the divided line is simply his hierarchy of knowing. And for Plato then, the hierarchy of knowing moves up from things like opinion into rational knowledge, experiential knowledge, but then you hit a line, and above that line requires the Nous. It's a line that requires us to open the eyes of our heart, and again, knowledge by reception of what is given to us when we're in this open, receptive manner of faith. In modern times, we have some of Plato's interpreters coming along with similar ideas. For example, Simone Weil in French would use the word attente, or attention, or receptive waiting. And this, she would say, is a sweet spot between striving and passivity. Or as Callistus Ware would say, it is neither the limp wrists nor the clenched fists, but rather the open hands of open receptivity. Martin Heidegger, the philosopher, used the German term Gelassenheit, which you could literally translate releasement, or to use Paul's language, yielding. And so this kind of releasement, it's a letting go of my mastery over knowledge, such that I become an open, attentive, receptive receptacle for the presence of God as it comes over the horizon to me. George Grant, the Canadian philosopher, would pray this prayer: Lord, show me the heart of the matter. To see the heart of the matter, whether that has to do with the beauty, truth, and justice revealed by God, or whether it's the heart of the matter in the world with material things, concepts, politics, public faith. The heart of the matter is seen by the Nous. It's picked up in that contemplative kind of knowing. And it does us no good to grit our teeth and clench our fists and try harder at this. In fact, quite the opposite is true. There needs to be a sort of relaxed centeredness that leads us to this posture that we call contemplation. My colleague Ron Dart has said so beautifully that the Nous is the organ of the soul which turns towards the overtures of divine love. And if you think about that as the true essence then of repentance, a turning towards God, a turning towards love, and then a receptivity to that love as it comes to us as light comes from the sun. And really this then forms some of the early church's notions of how the Son proceeds from the Father. The Son being, the Father being like the sun in the sky, and the light and the love of Jesus Christ coming to us by grace in a way that we could never leap to the Son. We must wait for it. And so this then is the organ of contemplation, the Nous, and the posture of contemplation, open, receptive, attentive waiting, yieldedness and surrender to the love that God sends forth to us, that creates the eyes of our heart and then fills them with light or illumination.